3, 2, 1, go. You're listening to The Kyle Chambers Show.
And welcome to The Kyle Chambers Show. My name is Kyle Chambers. I'm here today with France, and she has been in journalism for over 20 years. Thank you so much for joining the show today.
My pleasure, Kyle. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. So how did you have a passion for the journalism side and it ended up becoming a really big part of journalism and to where you are today?
Kyle, I think just as a kid, I was always really curious. And I always read the newspaper. I don't know if my friends ever did, but I was a kid and I remember the Toronto Star would come at 4:00 in the afternoon and I'd be home from school and I'd start reading it on the floor in the family room. And I did it for years. And then we'd get the Globe and Mail on the weekend and I'd read that too. And I think it was just, I've always been interested in a lot of different things. So news and politics, entertainment, sports, you name it. And I think that's a big part of being a journalist. I always tell people, I tell my students, is being curious is probably the best attribute, because if you're interested, then you're going to find the stories. If you're curious, you'll find the stories. So I think that's really how it started. And then when I was in university, I wrote for our newspaper. I was at Western. I wrote for our newspaper. And then we had a Master's of Journalism program at Western. So I'd applied there. I'd applied at Carleton. It was pretty competitive. And you just go where they accept you. And I got back into Western. So I did a master's there. And then I was very fortunate. My first job was at CTV in Toronto, and I stayed there for almost 10 years. And I was I was able to do a lot of different things there. So from news, local news, to current affairs, to talk show producing, interior design, you name it. And I had some really great mentors there. And then the company part started when somebody asked me to create a commercial for them. And I was like, okay. And then they said, can you do media for us? Can you get us some press for what we're trying to do? And then it just sort of grew from there. It wasn't really a plan. I haven't really had a plan, fortunately or unfortunately. I had goals, but sometimes not a plan. And that's how the company started. I went freelance as a journalist after I left CTV. That was sort of the way what we were doing, and it still is pretty freelance now. And then it just kind of grew from there. People kept asking me. It's always been word of mouth. My jobs have always been from word of mouth, from friends, people I know.
How has your company evolved over the past 20 plus years since you started as journalism has evolved?
Companies evolve because now there's different things I need to do. So we never did social media before because we never had it. We didn't have websites before, which sounds like I'm 170 years old. I'm not, but those are relatively newish. I remember doing a TV series for HGTV, and I was executive producing for IKEA, and it was a newish thing back then. Understanding where people get their information from, I think that's one of the biggest changes I've seen in the past few decades. The actual content creating that I do for clients is relatively the same. I love telling stories. As you know, I talk a lot, and I like hearing stories and listening and telling. So it's just different ways we tell stories. We still do video, but now those videos or those snippets or those photos are shown in different ways. So it's understanding how we communicate now.
What's been the most exciting TV project you've worked on in that field?
Oh, I would say the IKEA television series was probably the most exciting. They're an amazing company to work for. I got to start a production company within IKEA because they sell furniture. They don't make TV. When I was hired, the people that I was working with IKEA were very innovative, very creative. They gave me a lot of freedom. And then we traveled all over the world, and it was my ideal show because we got to showcase how people lived in different parts of the world. So when we would travel to, say, Madrid or Paris or Vancouver, we were in people's homes doing makeovers or showing beautiful spaces or things like that. And I think that's really exciting because I like to see how people live. I also did some very cool work when I was at CTV with Chanel. So long before everybody was backstage at Chanel, there was only a few journalists, myself one of them, who would be backstage at a fashion show, seeing the supermodels, seeing Karl Lagerfeld, seeing the whole experience, which was very, very, very cool, very exciting.
It's really amazing how things can change and shift. When you were working for IKEA, did you find you'd have to change the way you did your TV from behind the scenes because there were different cultural things with like
Yeah.
Germany as opposed to Canada as opposed to the USA, for example?
Yeah. That's a great question, Kyle. We were, as far as I know, the first North American design show to shoot in China, which was a great privilege, which also meant you had to be you're very respectful of any culture. Again, I've traveled around the world for my work, and you always have to remember you're the guest and you have to behave appropriately and be respectful, understand the culture, understand their way of living, and then you work within that, not the opposite.
So, what challenges and opportunities do you face in storytelling, and how do you overcome them and change them to be the best you can for your clients?
I think, Kyle, one of the biggest challenges we face is fake news. So disinformation. And a lot of that has come from social media. So where do people get their information? I was listening to a really interesting podcast yesterday on healthcare. And the physician that was the guest was talking about, for example, a TikTok video. And influencers promote something because they're being paid to. There's no science behind it. There's no information really. It's just try this or do this or this is cool. And I think, as a journalist, first and foremost, we're about not biased stories, balanced, good sources, telling an honest story with facts. It could be, purses, it could be politics. It doesn't matter. It's the same skill set that you use to tell a story. You know that. And trying to dispel or not get significance or recognition, but understanding for the one honest fact-based story, there's probably 1,000 non. And it's helping people understand where they get their information from. And is it fact-based? Did you know that most people get their news from Facebook? So people say, if my grandma sent it to me, it's true. That's not always the case. So it's constantly helping people understand to look where it came from. And just because it's on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook doesn't mean it's true. And then when we're putting out content, they understand, why does it cost a little bit more, or why does it take a little bit more, or why are you doing this? Because we want to make sure that the information that goes out is honest and truthful and unbiased. I think that's really one of the biggest challenges is just, and then of course, attention span, right? People don't pay attention like they used to because they're so distracted. So when I'm explaining strategies to clients, media strategies, or teaching it, if you don't catch them in the first, 2 or 3 or 7 seconds, they're gone. So we've always talked about that first impression people make. So it's the speed of which, because if I'm going to do a video about pink shirts and I'm going to put it on YouTube and why you should get this pink shirt, there's about 400 other ones. So if I don't catch you in the beginning and keep your attention, then you're gone, which comes back to news or journalism, that hook, that first sentence, that first strong video. If I get your attention when I put my story out there, you're going to watch. But if I take too long to explain it, I've lost you.
I think differentiating between accuracy and opinion is very important, no matter what political side you're on or news. If you're someone consuming it, knowing that it's an opinion of somebody rather than the actual news itself. I think there's influencers out there that try to not just blur the lines or talk about both, but also try to say what they say is fact because have been in journalism before, which I think can be very wonky, and it really is not good. So I think having the hook. So for example, the fires that were in Jasper, so a lot of the headlines were fires in Jasper, and they felt like they actually cared because it was a really big headline and a picture of, things on fire, which was awful, but it was what it needed to get the attention it deserved. So
absolutely. And you made a really good point too, blurring, and influencers, it's a different way of advertising. If you think about the history of advertising and people telling us we need something we may or may not need, it falls into that in my mind, marketing advertising. But you're right. It's, if you have trusted followers, if they say this shirt is red, do you believe them or do you question it? And I think I think maybe we have lost a little bit of that, where we need to make the decisions for ourselves, not because someone says. And that's always been the case, oh, I think this is great detergent, you should try it. Oh, I'll try it. Amazing. Friends talking, or try this coffee place or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's about trusting your gut. If this sounds off, it's off. And questioning people and questioning things. And I think we've never had to question what we are consuming as much as we do now. Because there's so much misinformation, and more importantly, disinformation, which is intentional wrong information, versus an accident. Oh, the party's starting at 7, but it started at 7:30, or there's no party, but you're coming anyways. That's intentional, right? And it's understanding the differences to it.
Are you excited to be able to be the program coordinator at Conestoga in the journalism program? And what opportunities do you have going forward in that here coming up in the fall?
I'm really excited, Kyle, because it's a really important time for the kind of work that we do. We're seeing some major cuts in media, which is unfortunate. It's going through a very painful growth stage as networks and big companies try and understand, again, who's the reader, who's the listener, who's the viewer, how are they getting information. We have competition from social media. So people are there. And as I said earlier, they're reading things that they see on social media, fact or not. And I think it's stressing how, and there's lots of jobs out there. They might not have been the one that I would have done, which is going right to a network, but there's lots of use for what we teach you. So storytelling is not going away, but it's making sure it's balanced. So the skill set that we teach is a skill set you can use in many, many different things, and teaching people to look at both sides. Make sure a source that you're talking to is a real source. There's a lot of hoaxes out there, right? Making sure that website is real, and those sorts of things, because I think there's a greater need for what we do more than ever, again, because of so much different disinformation, which, fake news is what's out there. And then the skills that we teach allow our students to do many different things. They can tell a story with audio like you do. They can tell a story with video. They can write a story. They can do it online. They can do it on television. They can write communications if they want to get into public relations. You can take what we teach you and kind of apply it to many different things. For small business, for example, I remember having a student years ago. He took a journalism program that I taught in at the time to be a real estate agent. So he could be on camera comfortably, tell stories and write and that kind of stuff. So I think people don't get locked into the idea of journalism, but it's storytelling that's accurately, and storytelling in many different mediums, which is how we need to do it now. You can't just know how to be on camera. You need to know how to write. You need to know how to have a good voice and those sorts of things, right? So that's what our program gives you. I'm super excited because I think it's a great program. It's one of there's some of that aren't left anymore. So I'm really happy and honored to be able to teach in that program at Conestoga.
Media is definitely shifting, but it's great you're able to find your niche with your company and also at Conestoga. So good luck with that.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm trying.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Kyle, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.